Wilson here. There's war in Europe. Russia has invaded Ukraine. It's always so hard to understand these conflagrations. We are so far away, and our view as Americans is always limited to the present. So I called my friend Olia, who was born in Ukraine and lived there till she was 30, and I asked her, what do we need to understand? What should Americans know about the Ukraine at this moment? And it's a great conversation. I'm glad you're going to listen to it. What comes up for me over and over again is the sense of pride in being a people, in being Ukrainian, not Russian, Ukrainian, and people who have for centuries struggled to maintain their independence against the outside forces that surround them. Olia was there in the Orange Revolution, for those of us who remember that, almost 20 years ago, and here we are in full-scale war. So I'm glad you're here, and without further ado, let's talk. I am here with my friend Olia, and Olia, can you introduce yourself and tell us all where you're from?
Sure. Hi, Adam. So my name is Olia Bilobran, and originally I am from the town of Busk, which is in western part of Ukraine.
Great. And how did you come? We met together here in Western Washington. Tell me about how you found yourself out here.
Sure. I came here to get my master's degree, and after my studies, I stayed here, got job, and that's how you and I met.
Right. Got it. Okay. I mean, so obviously there are many events going on in the world today around Ukraine, but I guess let's start with just how do you process this? Like we were talking just yesterday when I was asking if you could, do the show with me. How do you explain this to kids? Like what are you thinking right now? I guess where I'm going with this. Like what's your first take on the situation in Ukraine right now?
What's going on is it's absolutely unbelievable. It's horrible because it should have never ever happened, and just to realize that all these worst predictions, all these nightmares, they just became true, and everybody is angry, very angry. I mean, in my family, in our community, because it's not the very beginning, because the war basically started 8 years ago. It's just the next stage, and nobody can predict what will happen next.
I totally hear you on the being unbelievable, because this is it's interesting to me how shocking it is, given that, as you said, that this started a long time ago, and that even this most recent, this is a full-scale attack on Ukraine by Russia, and that itself was forecast very explicitly for over a month, I think. But do you feel like the people of Ukraine or the folks there are also shocked, or or is it just sort of us on the outside can't understand how real the situation was becoming?
No, I think everybody's shocked back at home as well, and I know there were predictions, I know there were warnings, but you still cannot. I think people still have this belief in and hope in common sense, in human nature, kind human natures. That's why it's difficult to believe. And when trying to understand myself, I was wondering why despite all these warnings, people were still thinking like, no, that cannot happen. And what I came up with is, when COVID hit, what was the reaction of the world? Everybody is like, it will be here, like, well, it's 2 months at most. In 2 months, we are all back in the offices. We'll have our life. We can go. 2 years passed. We are still not done with it.
Yes,
So
that is an amazingly good example of
so
assuming the
is it just,
best.
yeah, is it human nature? Is it how our psychology works, that you're kind of like trying to protect yourself, and it's hard to believe that this nightmare can happen? I
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's I think you're definitely onto something there, that it's we are used to people talking about the bad things that might happen, but when they, especially in this case where it seems very intentional. I mean, uh, what? Well, here's the thing. Okay, let's back up. I, like most Americans, only have a vague understanding of Ukraine, and I think that most of us know that it's somewhere between what we thought was Europe, right? I think Americans were raised with this idea that Europe stopped somewhere about the middle of Germany, and then there was just Russia, and now I'm sure there are folks like myself who are trying to wrap their minds around the politics of Belarus and Ukraine and Romania and those places. So, can you give me a sense, just for those of us who are just trying to understand what's going on here? What is the historical background when we say there's been an 8-year war? Well, how did we get to a war that lasted 8 years? How did we get to a Ukraine and not just part of the USSR?
Yeah, and that's something that's always, especially when coming here and listening to the movies, and how everything and everybody from the Soviet Union just called, any country is just called Russia, any nation is called Russian, and to me, it's like, it always I produces a reaction in me. It's like, it's not. Soviet Union was comprised of 15 nations, 15 countries. We are not Russians. It's like it's all different. You cannot, like, the Commonwealth of Great Britain. You cannot call like disregard India or Canada and just call them Great Britain. They are
Right,
not.
right.
So the same here. And as for like to give a bit of historical background, especially given the statements that Putin made a few days ago. So Ukraine is located in Eastern Europe. It borders on Russia in the east and northeast. On the north, it borders on Belarus. On the west, you have countries like Poland, Romania, Slovakia. And in the south, you have Moldova, and it's also washed by the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. And it is the biggest country in Europe
That's interesting.
by territory. If you try to kind of still wrap up your mind, it is about the size of Texas.
Okay.
So
Wow.
it is the biggest country, and it has ancient history. In about ninth century, the population on the territory of Ukraine, like there were different settlements for a long time.
Sure.
But in the ninth century, Swedish Vikings, sorry, they came by the river into the territory, which is Ukraine now. They captured Kyiv, that is the capital of Ukraine.
Ah, okay.
And
Okay.
at that time, there were Slavs living there, Slavic people. And from that time, the territory, the country that was organized there, and it's now Ukraine, it was called Kiev Rus, and Kiev was the capital.
Ah, okay. It
In
still is, yes.
and in 1988, Ukraine was converted to Christianity, and it occupied territory all the way to the current Baltic countries. So that's what is Belarus now.
Okay.
And At that time, Moscow even was not founded. So you cannot say that the territory of Ukraine is, as they always claim, it's Russia. It's not. It pre-existed whatever is Russia now,
That's fascinating. That's fascinating.
and only because of the frequent trips, so to say, of Mongols, some population started moving north from Kiev, and that's how Moscow was created, and all these territories started being populated.
Okay.
So that's why no, Lenin did not create Russia.
That's fascinating. Isn't it interesting to
Sorry,
see?
did not create Ukraine. Sorry for
Right.
that.
Yes, I'm with you. Uh, isn't it fascinating how we always kind of weaponize history, right? I think that's what you're talking about, is that Putin and his regime are spinning the tale of that this is traditional Russian ground and that the Ukrainians are Russians and they need to be. I think the actual argument was like they need to be kept safe. We have to keep the civilians safe. And I, give me a sense of like, are there a lot of different ethnic religious groups in Ukraine? Is there some sort of like a faction that he's working on there? Is there?
Yeah. So before World War II, Ukraine has always been a multinational country, but even more so before World War II, where we had a lot of Germans, a lot of Jewish people, a lot of Polish people, of course, Ukrainians, Crimean Tatars, and even in my hometown at the beginning of 20th century, the Jewish was the biggest population. Second was Polish, and Ukrainians were only third.
Really? Oh, wow.
Yes. So Ukraine, again, it's a separate country. It has its own Ukrainian language. So that's why don't assume that every Ukrainian speaks Russian and start addressing in
Right.
Russian. They do. There are some Ukrainians who speak Russian. There are
Mhm.
some Russians who live in Ukraine, but official language is Ukrainian.
So it
And
is. They
any
have
other,
their own language. It is they speak Ukrainian. Okay, this is
yes,
good to know.
we speak Ukrainian, and even when I was in college, one of my professors, he attended many international conferences. He was a linguist himself. So he said that among linguists, among those people who dedicate their life to developing different or researching different languages, there is like a joke going around. So if you want to speak to God, you need to address him in Spanish. If you want to speak to angels, you need to address them in Italian. But if you want to talk to a woman and tell her about your life, you need to use Ukrainian, because Ukrainian is such a melodic, such a beautiful, based on the sounds, language. And also, if to assume that Ukrainian is the same as Russian, or like Russians like to claim it's a dialect, it is not. It is part of a Slavic languages family.
Sure.
We
Okay.
have Ukrainian, we have Russian, we have Polish, we have Belarusians. It's the same as to assume that French and Spanish is the same language, or one is a dialect of another because they
Right.
belong to the same family, or that English and German are the same or dialect of one of another because they belong to the same language family. But we know very well those are different.
Right. Right. Yes. Absolutely. And it does. I think what you're getting to too is that there is a good understanding, even in the United States, which is famous for being sort of insulated where we are, but that there's differences between ethnic and regional groups and language groups that may seem minor to, I don't know, to someone from Southeast Asia. The difference between French and Italian and Spanish may seem small, but it's very important to the people who live there and to their way of life, and they are distinct cultures. But I think that we are struggling to do that with Eastern Europe that we don't really understand. As, you know, as Americans, we are not very familiar with those differences. So it's perhaps an easier sell for folks like Putin, who want to just say, well, it's, you know, they were part of the Soviet state and now they need to be again. And I think that the one conversation going on in the United States right now is like, well, what do we care? It's so far away. It doesn't affect us. Why would we get involved with something, especially that Russia has strong feelings about? I mean, what do you make of that? Uh, Go ahead.
Yeah, Russia has had strong feelings about Ukraine for centuries, but why should Americans care? Because in so Ukraine became independent in 1991 after the collapse of Soviet Union. Uh, Besides the government proclaiming that, okay, we want to be independent, in August of 1991, in December, they also held a referendum to kind of solidify this choice, where people had questioned basically, are you confirming, do you agree that Ukraine should be independent? And 90% of the population confirmed that,
Oh, wow.
expressing their will to be independent from Ukraine. And yesterday I pulled up some numbers. So Donbass, during that referendum, in Donbass, almost 84% of people said yes, we want to be in Ukraine independent from the Soviet Union. In Lugansk was the same percentage, and Crimea, 57% of population said they want to be independent.
Really?
They want to be independent from the USSR as part of Ukraine. And so when Ukraine became independent, it inherited third largest arsenal of nuclear weapons. You had Russia, you had US, and Ukraine was the third one in the
Wow.
whole world.
Wow.
So here comes 1994, and based on leaders talking, there is a decision made that Ukraine will give up its nuclear power, and in return, Great Britain, US, and Russia, as countries with nuclear power, will agree to, and let me read it, will commit to respect the independence and sovereignty and the existing borders of Ukraine
Wow.
in
Hmm.
1994. That's why and this was confirmed with Budapest memorandums. So these three countries signed it to guarantee independence and borders of Ukraine.
Right.
And I remember till today my history class in my high school, when our teacher was explaining to us, this is such a huge win because you have most powerful countries, US and Russia, protecting us, agreeing to respect our borders forever. Russians will never ever invade us again.
Yeah. That is.
And
That's. That's a very human story, right? Like you lay down your arms. You stop. We don't want you to be a threat. We don't. You don't need all this armament. Uh, and then we will never. We won't cross you. And then
exactly,
a generation later, folks have forgotten, or maybe they didn't forget and they're just willfully ignoring that. But now that's just tragic in looking at today's circumstances, right? Because there's no scenario in which Russia would invade a nuclear armed Ukraine. I mean, I can't imagine that. So, wow. But what happens
exactly.
after that? So this is the '90s. I mean, I remember this as this whole like rapprochement period where the USSR, and the U.S. and Great Britain, we were all getting along fairly well. In the '90s, there's this like realignment for the new world order, but that has clearly changed. So what's your memory of how things tipped from being like, look, everyone's agreed to respect us to now there's there's torment and threats again.
Well, it's been, if I can call it a project it's been a project for years, but also I still need to go back in history to kind of so people understand where the roots are coming from. So this current project, it's been in the works for years, but I think it's been in the works for centuries. So again, when Ukraine became a part of USSR in the last century, what happened was that in 1933, Stalin created an artificial famine. Ukraine is famous for its soil, black soil. It's called the breadbasket of the world because the soil is so rich, can grow so much wheat, and it's one of the biggest importers of wheat in the world. And right now, the prices for wheat are skyrocketing because of the war.
Right.
So Stalin created this artificial famine where all the wheat was confiscated and people starved to death. And with estimations of 7 or 10 million people died from famine.
Wow.
In eastern
Wow.
Ukraine.
7 or 10
And
million?
yes,
Jeez.
and Ukraine been fighting for a long time for it to be recognized as at the same level as Holocaust is. But of course, we have Russia who always have vetoes everywhere and is
Right.
not letting that happen. And also playing it down that was, those were difficult times. 1933, it was a difficult time for everybody in the world.
Right.
It was for everybody, but no other nation had 7 to 10 million people die from
That's
starvation
insane.
with such huge resources, natural resources. So you have, as I said, so many people die. What do you do with this empty land when all these empty houses? They brought Russians.
Ah, yes. Mm-hmm.
Here are the houses. Go live. Go educate people about all the benefits of communism, how wonderful it's going to be. Then you have World War II. And in 1944, during World War II, Stalin packs all Crimean Tatars on the planes and sends them to Kazakhstan.
Hmm.
What do you do with empty houses and the empty land in Crimea? You
Right.
send Russians. And you claim it. It's been the territory. It was conquered by Russians in the 18th century. I agree with that. But again, the biggest population, the native population, was Crimean Tatars.
Interesting. Okay.
So that's why now all those people, they now have kids, they now have grandkids. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, they speak Russian, especially given again that the same family group, nobody
Mm-hmm.
like if you speak Russian to me, I will understand you. I can speak Russian as well, but so they can understand Ukrainian.
Mm-hmm.
But again, so that's why you have majority of population in the east who speaks Russian, and population who lives in Crimea speaks Russian.
That's fascinating. I did not know that, and it's terrible that that isn't a known part of like what is it? I guess in North America that is not part of European history, right? That's
Yeah.
you know it's sounds very comparable to like the Irish potato famine, which was exacerbated by British policies, and the Irish had food, but it was being exported while people starved to death. And
Exactly.
we, at least those of us who care to know Irish history, know all about that. But I had not heard of a very similar situation. It sounds like in Ukraine, and that would explain why you end up with large Russian-speaking populations in like Crimea, because you've essentially emptied out the populace and replaced them. Okay, all right.
And then so after things were not so smooth in the Soviet Union, I believe, at the end of 80s, I think Crimeans started coming back, and they wanted to reclaim back their land, their houses and stuff like that. So they, of course, now with the Russians there again, they are arrested, they are deported, and things are horrible again.
Mm.
But so that's why I'm saying the project of destroying Ukrainians, of capturing the land, it's been for centuries. And so now, going back to more recent history, in 2004, when we had presidential elections, and again, it was a rigged election, and the pro-Russian candidate won, and the pro-European candidate was poisoned, as you may recall,
I
Viktor
do remember
Yushchenko.
that. Yes.
Yeah, Ukrainians took it to the streets. Like, what's going on? That's not what we voted for. And I participated in that Orange Revolution as well. So they had to recalculate the results. Viktor Yushchenko did become the president, but Russia didn't give up. Here we have another election in a few years, and then the same candidate, pro-Russian candidate, does become the president. And when he decides to cut ties with the European Union and develop tighter, closer ties with Russia, that's when Ukrainians took it on the streets again. And that's one of the things to keep in mind. Even despite of all the odds, Ukrainians are fighters. They will not give up.
It's impressive. I mean, so, if we're talking about like, how do we get here? It sounds like, when you put it in this context, we've watched just in our lifetimes a couple attempts by the Russians to take control of the political apparatus, right? To like, we'll get our candidate elected president in Ukraine, and then we'll just bring them into the orbit, which I think is what happened to Belarus, I think, because they were also more of a Western-style democracy, and I think they fell into the Russian orbit. But the Ukrainians have resisted that. Like, as you said, tell me about that. Tell me about being part of the Orange Revolution. I did not know you were a revolutionary, Olia. This is new information for me.
I am, yes. And here, before Orange Revolution, I want to make kind of like give you another piece of old history. So during the World War II, Ukrainians were, especially in Western Ukraine, they were fighting two fronts. They were fighting Russians, the Soviet Union, and they were fighting Germans. They wanted to be Ukraine like they were one united Ukraine, like they were after the World War One.
Okay.
Of course, that didn't happen. But so, I mean, they were not able to create independent Ukraine from the Soviet Union, but the fight continued until 1954 or 55. You have, and keep in mind, World War II was over in 1945. You have still Stalin in power, but Ukrainians keep fighting even after Stalin's death in 53. So we are fighters. With Orange Revolution, when when we heard that pro-Russian candidate got more points, and nobody believed that, because everybody, like, it's not that secret. It's more secret maybe in US, where you don't talk whom you voted for, and
Right.
like, it's not custom to talk about things. Over there, it's like, whom did you support? That's what people are very open. So the results don't make sense. And I remember I was at that time I worked in Kyiv, and you hear the results, and it's like, I cannot believe it. We don't want to go to Russia. We don't want to go. Like, you don't have to. You don't want to recreate again those connections. You don't want to be again creating some kind of Soviet Union. So I remember my coworker and I walked to downtown. It was not far from our work, and it's unbelievable. It's like scenes from the movies from World War II, where you have a speaker on a light pole that talks to people, and people started just taking to the streets. Just nobody like was organizing, nobody was paying us go, protest.
Right.
People just took to the streets. We disagree. This is not right. We need to recount the we need to recount the ballots and so on. And people just brought their tents to make it like 24/7 protest. People from all over Ukraine started coming, protesting, and what you experience there, it's incredible. Never ever in my life I have felt this unity. You have main square Maidan in Kyiv packed with people, and even beyond Maidan, all like surrounding streets with tents where people live. You have citizens of Kyiv bringing hot food during the whole night. Like my
Right.
managers, they come to work and they like, I didn't sleep much, so maybe I'll go from work, leave earlier because I was making sandwiches and hot coffee, hot tea, delivering.
Right.
And and then we had politicians, musicians come and kind of talk to people and organize like some support, some kind of support with. So people were helping each other whatever they can, money, singing, entertain, just kind of like to lift the spirits up. And I remember even at one point I was standing in Maidan with my colleagues. It's evening, and we don't know we don't know what's going to happen. And I remember my mom calling me as like, "Where are you? Home, home."
Yeah, right.
And she's like, "For sure." I'm like, "Yes." And she says, well, just in case you're not at home yet, just very close walking to home, I want to let you know that on the radio they said that, they weaponized criminals in prison and they let people from two prisons go
What?
to be people in Maidan. Just so you know. I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, don't
Okay.
worry, I'm at home. I hang up and I'm like to my colleagues, and it's like, hey, this is what they're saying. I am scared. I am. I am not hiding
Sure.
this. I'm like, you guys think we should start, like, we should go away before they reach the Maidan? And I remember my colleagues like, no, don't worry. I was standing, I was looking where, in case I would run,
Right.
looking for exits. But, and I hear people, start picking up phones around me. So people did get probably similar messages, but
Right.
nobody left.
Well, that's
Nobody left
amazing. That's
there.
amazing.
And like again, this support, even there is some barrier, you want to cross it, and from out of nowhere there shows up a man's like, hey, let me give you a hand, here's my hand, cross. It like I said, I have never experienced such unity. And we did, with those peaceful protests, we did achieve our goal, where ballots were recounted and people got the true results. And that's and we also been saying, declare that we got our country Ukraine from USSR. We got it kind of like in a peaceful manner. Baltic countries, there
Right.
were some suppressions, there were life loss, and we were so happy it was done peacefully. And so in 2004, during Orange Revolution, nobody died. So you couldn't have even imagined that something can happen. So when in 2013, when Yanukovych decided, to cut ties with European Union and become closer with Russia, and people again took it to the streets, took it to Maidan, and then
Right.
in February of 2014, when Russian forces were brought in and they started shooting at people at Maidan, nobody could believe it. I woke up and there were a few dead, and I'm like, I couldn't believe. I'm calling
Wow.
my family here, my friends. It's like, is it for real? How can it happen in Ukraine? How can it happen in this century?
Yeah.
And so at the time, they killed 100 people, in 100 protesters in Maidan. And that was, that's a huge tragedy. But again, it's fascinating. When they started shooting people, of course, some people started running, And so you understand, there is downtown Kyiv, there is Maidan,
Okay.
and then like
That's the main square,
streets.
right? That's
Yes, yes, and then streets go up, kind of like sun rays, go up
okay.
from Maidan, and they lead you. Some of them lead you to two most ancient cathedrals in Ukraine. Like one of them is more than 1,000 years old and stuff.
Wow.
So people started banging on the doors of those cathedrals. Monks opened,
Okay.
and like kind of to protect people and to give them shelter. And at the same time, how do you let people know, there is something's going on?
Yeah.
So they use and it's again, it's like you are thrown 1,000 years ago. So one monk climbs the tower and starts banging on church bells,
Church bells.
like
Wow.
to
Wow.
wake up people in Kyiv that there is something's going on. So, and I have to correct myself. So that was even before those shootings. That's where there were initial attempts to disperse people from protesting.
Wow. Yeah.
And it throws me to those times when Tatars were attacking people in Kyiv Ras, in
Right.
that that I was just telling you. That's how there were no cell phones, right? 1,000 years ago.
Yeah.
That's how people were warning about what's going on. You would use church bells,
Yeah.
and here we are, 1,000 years, and so people were waking up, started calling, and instead of running, like yes, some people ran away, but the rest is like, what? And they have more people coming.
Really? That's
So, to support those who've been treated badly,
right.
who have
Yeah.
been beaten.
They're
And
coming
so
to you.
exactly, exactly. And so now, after those 100 people were killed, people, that's when you heard and probably saw images. People start just digging out the cobblestone from the road, throwing into police, throwing into those snipers, and burning
Right. Gosh. Anything they could,
burning
rocks in
things.
the streets. Yeah. Anything. Yeah.
I couldn't believe watching from here, Maidan, where I would walk, spend so much time.
Mm-hmm.
People use whatever they can to protect themselves, to defend others.
Wow. Yeah. It's remarkable. And it sounds, it's like a constant refrain as we've been talking, like over and over again. It's left to the Ukrainians to try and defend themselves against uh, uh, invaders, people coming to get them or interfere with their politics. And yeah, wow. And that's 2013.
That was
Thereabout.
2013, 2014.
Right.
Yes.
And then that's when you had sort of, there was an attempt by, right, was it Yanukovych, who
Correct.
was trying to sever ties with Europe and NATO and direct attention to Russia. And we have another, again, the Ukrainian people kind of unite together and demand some kind of independence. And that's about when the Russians moved into Crimea, right? Is that right?
Exactly. So yes. So like I said, those people in Maidan, those first 100, we call them heavenly 100 now. They were killed in February. And after that, like I was describing, people started, even started fighting more. And Yanukovych did get scared, and he ran away to Russia. And that's when the new president, Poroshenko, was elected. And because he has pro-Western views, that's why they started saying he is pro-Nazi and all other rhetoric that they are having. And then that's when they invaded Russia. And no, sorry, that's when they invaded Crimea, I believe in March 2014, and Luhansk and Donetsk Oblast.
Right. Okay. Well, it's just I don't know if we want to jump over the whole period there, but that started fighting that essentially never ended. Am I right there? Like that
Exactly.
once, not that it was like what we're talking about right now at this moment, but Russians stepped their foot into Crimea and cut it off, and then they have ever since, to varying degrees, been supplying and arming and helping the what we would call separatists in the east of Ukraine. Now, when I say quote unquote separatists, because I feel like at one point, right, there were like Russian soldiers doing that fighting without uniforms. I remember that. Like there was like, wait a minute, these aren't actually Ukrainians. These are Russian military people who just took off the uniform at the border and were. So the idea that I mean, it was a pretty shoddy artifice, right? Like, you know, how does this psychological part work? You're here in the U.S. What do you make of that? There's this constant, and I, for one, am impressed by the Russians because there's this constant fog of what's true, and it's psychologically hard for me to be like, well, they say that the sun came up over in the west, actually, and you have to like think, can that be true? Did it do that? And they have things like, oh, well, it's a what was the argument? The Nazification is really fascinating to me because you're
Yep.
pulling on this for Americans the mirror side of history. To us, we fought the Nazis and they're gone now, and Germany is one of the good guys. But I can understand from the Russian perspective, who had to do a lot more fighting and dying than we did to prevent the Nazis from actually like capturing Russia. So I can understand like from their perspective, like, oh, well, if Ukraine is going to be friends with Europe, that's friends with the old invaders, the Nazis. But so what do you make of this sort of like constant fog of half truths and distortions and rewriting of history? Do you think how much has that played into where we are today? Like, how did that get us to this like open warfare?
It's not surprising that's their common behavior, and I remember at those times, um, when people would say, like Ukrainians would say, like you cannot believe them, they are lying, or like you can never trust them, and other international community was like, like, oh, maybe it's possible, maybe we should check it, right?
Right.
Because
Yeah.
somehow something changed. And I remember that the president, one of the Baltic countries, said, like, no, you have to trust us because, like, Ukraine, Baltic countries, Poland, we've been dealing with them for centuries. We know them. You have to listen to us.
Right. Yeah. You've had the
That
experience.
exactly. And so you have to put, you have to put trust. Like it's. And at the same time, they say we call them like green men that occupied Crimea because they were wearing green uniform without any identification. Later, they acknowledged they were Russians, and the same in Eastern Ukraine. And another thing is also, Eastern Ukraine, they didn't have this military equipment. Where
Right.
from? Like
Right.
they didn't. And there was a point in that fight where Ukrainian forces almost took the territories back from those separatists. But the separatists got a sudden influx of military weapon
Right.
to fight Ukrainians from Russia. Had they not had that, we would have reclaimed back the territory.
Sure.
But
Absolutely.
the fight was so fierce, and it's also part of history now. In Donetsk airport, it was for months. People were there fighting, Ukrainians protecting it, and like people say, it's not the people, it's the concrete that couldn't stand anymore and fall down.
Wow.
And then because of that powerful weapon that was delivered to them, Ukrainians had to retreat, and those separatists, supported by Russians, they agreed that Ukrainian troops can peacefully go back. They will not fight, but just let them go back.
Okay.
And guess what happened?
Tell
They
me.
lied. They surrounded them and they started shooting the surrendered soldiers who were just retrieving back.
Wow.
You just cannot trust them. I just cannot trust anything they say.
It's it is I get, it kind of takes us back to where we started, where like as a human, you want to believe people. You want to think that they're going to do what they say they're going to do, but that is in the hands of someone who's very committed, or a people who's very committed to something. It's a weapon, because it's a constant, like, you're constantly taking advantage of people's uh, good assumptions, I guess, is the theme here, right? You constantly take advantage of their good assumptions. I totally hear you on that. Is this, I don't know. I don't know where we are in this situation, but I've been seen this enough times where the U.S. is trying to deal with a political situation that becomes a military situation, and as one of those, as you say, Ukraine is there trying to express its own independence as a culture and a people, and then there are these huge big countries, right? There's the U.S. and the USSR and China, and these countries have a totally different calculation, but because they have the resources and the technology, they can totally uh, interfere with, or depending on your point of view, tip the balance or help out. But by Russia saying, we're going to give these folks advanced weaponry, and the Ukrainian military, I presume, is not like, definitely not in 2014, was not like on the same page as the Russian military. It was totally changes the equation. So tell me a little bit about, I guess where I was going there is, like, I don't know if we should be talking about military stuff now. Do you think this is a war now, and it's about weapons and ammunition and food, or is it still a political, or I guess it's not like one or the other, but how much of this is still like a political fight where Russia's testing Ukraine's resolve, or do you think it's just right now, your impression is just like a military battle?
I don't. I think it's both. It just in the mind of Russians again, and it's been for centuries, that we are the same. We are just a younger brother, as they call us, and it's not as language. It's just Russian dialect. We are not the same. We are not. We have never been the same. We are different country, different thinking, different language. And that's what they've been trying to always do, to bring us back and make a part of Russia. And nobody want there are people, like I said, there are some who like Putin, who want to be. Nobody is keeping you. As we have this expression, here is your suitcase, here is railway station, and here is Russia. Go pack and go.
Right.
Why are you crying for Putin but still living in Ukraine? You love him so much, you want to be a part of Russia. There is a separate country called Russia. Go there.
Yes, I like
Otherwise,
that. Yes.
Otherwise, this is Ukraine. You have to respect the borders, you have to respect the language, you have to respect the history, you have to respect the people.
Right.
That's always put, like I said, on a bigger scale goal of Russia, especially now Putin with his ambitions, he wants it back.
Right.
And it's been the war. It just now became on a bigger scale.
Yeah.
And I also want to share the words of one of the Polish presidents, I believe, who said back in 2008 when Russia invaded Georgia. He said, today it's Georgia, in the morning it's Ukraine, in the afternoon it's Baltic countries, and tomorrow it may be us.
Right.
So again, about the whole thinking of Eastern Europe and where things may go and what's been going on there for past few decades.
Oh, it's scary to contemplate. What what would you say the best scenario is right now? What would be the best outcome starting today from where we are to some sort of, like ideal state for Ukraine? What do you think that looks like?
Independent Ukraine within its borders that were um, it, within the borders that were proclaimed in 1991 when Ukraine proclaimed its independence.
There you go.
Russians leave us alone.
That is. Do you foresee Ukraine being able to do that as it stands now? I guess the way that the situation is set up now, it looks like Russia is going to do all it can to bring Ukraine under its control. And the European nations and the West, including the US and I think Japan and South Korea, are like, well, we oppose that and we will help Ukraine, but help stops at railroad cars, right? It stops at sending them things or money, but we are not going to go in there and insert ourselves literally, like our lives won't be on the line. So given that, do you think that's enough? Or do you feel like it's enough right now to get you to that independent Ukraine?
I think, well, first of all, we are thankful for all the help we've been getting, for military help, for all the weaponry, for support, for that countries did make unanimous statements. We are really grateful, but it is not enough. It's not enough. Like I've been telling you, we are fighters. We will be fighting. Even if we lose, it's no way in hell people will surrender and they will follow the Russian direction and I just cannot see that.
Right.
No one will. And we do need help. We do need more weapon. We do need sanctions, and they need to be now. Why to wait to impose them against Putin? What else are you waiting for? I don't understand.
Right. Yes.
Nobody
What
understands.
What else could he do? Right. Yeah.
What else do you need to see? Yesterday they got Chernobyl. They got control of Chernobyl nuclear power. Again, Chernobyl is on the territory of Ukraine. It's not some USSR. It's
right.
in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Why do you need it?
Yeah. Why would?
What is going? What does he have? What's his plan?
That is a very good question, and I do not understand. Yeah. Why would you go in there and seize a disaster site that the USSR? I mean, I guess they had a hand in creating that horrible disaster, but it's a dangerous situation.
And then if like Biden is suggesting to cut Russia from SWIFT, but you have Hungary, you have Germany, you have Italy, you have Cyprus. Though I'm not surprised because of their again how they've been behaving, these countries, especially Germany and Hungary with their pro-Russian government. It's don't downplay us. Don't downplay Ukraine. You will pay way bigger price later.
Right.
And by you, I mean the whole world.
It's
because you don't know where it can lead. And again, Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons. How can you now, with a straight face, talk to Iran, talk to North Korea, talk to anybody? What argument do you have?
That is
discourage them from developing, having countries. How can you even talk to us and tell us, like, don't do it, guys?
It is an excellent point. It is an excellent point. Wow. Well,
and again, as the Polish government official said, it's Georgia, then it's Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And Baltic countries and Poland, and who knows? Nobody knows. Nobody can predict. There is no intelligence that can predict what he can do or what he's thinking about.
Right. Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I do not want to exaggerate historical comparisons here because it's always dangerous. But we have seen before in Europe where folks claim that they are only taking back their ancestral lands or people who speak the same language as them, and that that is a slippery slope is the wrong way to call it, but it accelerates quickly, right? If he had failed if Russia had had more trouble in Georgia, we wouldn't be having this problem now in Ukraine. And if they don't have a lot of trouble in Ukraine, I totally agree that then why would they not move beyond there if the price isn't steep?
And before you say next, I want to comment on something you just said. People claiming their ancestors' land, but it's like, how far do we go?
Right.
Can I go 1,000 back when Ukraine was all, like I told you, all the way to the Baltic Russians and start claiming those lands?
Right. Yeah.
Europe has been recrafted so many times.
Mm-hmm.
What if somebody else decides, like, okay, like 300 years ago, it was my land. Well, what about 500? How far do you go? Where do you put, like, how do you decide where that benchmark, that base is?
Right. Absolutely. Humans move around. They always have. And that you can,
Exactly.
always make claims about somebody was here first or it really belongs to us. And it is a dangerous game to play to justify, war, to justify violence. Uh, but I know we only had like an hour, but I do want to ask you, like, what do you, I don't know if this is a positive note, but what do you think about growing up in Ukraine? What has that given you? And what do you think that, like, it's added to your life? And do you think what's the upside, I guess, of having this experience and knowing that your people are still in there and hanging in, and that how do I want to put this? You are an example of the surviving spirit, right? Like you're still Ukrainian, still here. So what does that give you? How do you think about it?
Well, I am very proud to be Ukrainian, to be born there. I want to tell it's a beautiful country, country where there are very hardworking people. And about 3 years ago, I took my family there, my husband and my kids, and they've been asking to go back since then. And we are still planning to go there in summer, but yeah, everything right now is up in the air. And on the way to Ukraine, we stopped in Vienna in Austria, and we spent a few days there. And when we came to Ukraine and spent a few weeks there, then I asked my husband, because for him it was the first time. It's like, what do you think? And he said, like, well, I liked it more than Vienna. So it is beautiful, very kind, intelligent, smart people, and we are fighters. We will not give up. And growing there, I besides pride for my people, it also gave me, love to work, love about people, and appreciation about everything good that people can contribute to the world. And no matter what, we will prevail. No matter what the outcome, we'll just not give up, but we'll pay the heavy price. And another thing is also, and yesterday when I talked to my friend, the tragedy is the best are dying. Mm-hmm. You have now, besides, men especially being obligated to go serve in the army, you have thousands of volunteers signing up and ready to fight.
Right.
And, tons of them are young people. And the question is, the tragedy for me is, no matter what the outcome, who is left? Who is going to create families, have kids, and keep it going?
That is a tragedy to contemplate. A lost,
and
generation. A whole generation is now in peril.
Yes. And I'm not talking about, all the material, physical consequences of war and psychological.
Mm-hmm.
And my question is also, like, Russian citizens, what have you been doing? Now you started yesterday first protests, but it's a little bit too late.
Right.
and you are afraid, you're afraid to protest. We were not, we were, like I was describing you. We were shot at, we were killed at, we were still protesting. You are afraid, but what about our kids who are afraid, who are being bombarded? Waking up to bombs and with tears in their eyes, what do their parents have to say?
It is reality for some people, and for the rest of us, it's a concept. It's, yeah. Well,
And
thank
if
you.
you're
Yeah,
afraid,
go ahead. No.
you're afraid there, then what about all over the world? There are so many of you in different countries. What are you doing? Like, he cannot get you there. Where are all your protests? What have you been doing till now? What have you been doing for all these past 8 years?
Right. Where is that? Well, what do you, I don't want to get us on a total sidetrack, but like, what do you, there's always like a difference between the people and the government. And Putin is clearly an authoritarian leader. But do you have a sense that if Russia had continued down the path of a Western style, a liberal democracy, I think is the actual term for it, as it had a long time ago before Putin, do you think that this would be happening now? Is it, or I don't know, given like the long cultural history here, if it would have made a difference. But what do you think?
I don't want to think that would be the case. I don't. If and also to talking to some of the, like, I cut my ties as soon as the war began in 2014. I don't talk to basically any of them here anymore. But before that, it's surprising how even people my age, how brainwashed they are. How there is no Ukraine, there is no language, and it's just amazing. For you're a young person, you've been traveling, you live here, and you still make these statements. Again, it didn't happen overnight. It's been a project for centuries, and this project been intensified for past few decades again.
Yes.
And all these centuries, all these years, the same message: leave us alone. We don't want to have anything to do with you. Leave us alone. We are different. We are not the same.
It's a, well, I hope that it improves. That's, I guess, all we can hope, right? That the trajectory, which has clearly been going in the wrong direction for 20 years at least, turns around. The Ukrainians have done it before, so I hope that there's some way for them to beat the odds again.
I do hope, but like I said, we do need help, and we need it now. Otherwise, brace for yourself. It's you never know who will be the next or what will happen next.
Well, thank you, Olia. It's great to talk to you and to get some personal knowledge on something that's so far away for so many of us. So I appreciate you sharing. And yeah.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you for reaching out, and thank you for giving me a chance to speak.
Absolutely.